Welcome to the July Astrology Update. Now, there are dozens of astrological events this month, but most of them won't matter to most people. So instead of spending the next 45 minutes covering everything, let's spend the next few minutes looking at the 3 transits I'd actually be paying attention to. Now, I'll explain what's happening, why astrologers consider these transits important, and what I'd be looking for if I wanted to get the most out of July. Let's jump on in. Let's start with the transit everybody has heard of, Mercury retrograde. But before you roll your eyes or start blaming it for everything that's about to go wrong this month, let's look at what's actually happening. Now, Mercury governs how we think, learn, communicate, and process information. During a retrograde, those processes tend to slow down. Now, that doesn't mean that they're broken. It simply means that they're asking for a second look. And this month, Mercury is retrograde in Cancer. That's important because Cancer doesn't process information logically first. It processes it emotionally. So in practical terms, that might mean conversations take longer, old issues resurface, you realize you misunderstood somebody's intentions, or they misunderstood yours. You may even surprise yourself by reacting emotionally before you've even had time to think things through. Now, Cancer is a water sign. It remembers, it protects, it carries history. So when Mercury retraces its steps here, it's often less about discovering new information, more about revisiting conversations, memories, or decisions that still have some emotional unfinished business. If there's one thing I'd encourage you to watch this month, it's to notice how often your first reaction changes after you've given yourself a little time to reflect. Mercury retrograde often rewards the second conversation more than the first. Rather than seeing Mercury retrograde as a problem, think of it as an editing process. It's an opportunity to improve your communication before life asks you to commit to it. The second transit I'll be paying attention to this month is Jupiter and its move into Leo. Now, Jupiter only changes sign every 12 to 13 years, so whenever Jupiter moves, it's worth sitting up and taking notice. Now, before we talk about what that means, let's step back for a moment. One of the easiest ways to understand astrology is to think of each planet and sign as bringing something different to the conversation. Jupiter is the planet of growth, so whenever Jupiter travels, it tends to expand our horizons. It encourages us to learn, explore, and take opportunities that help us to grow. Leo, on the other hand, is the sign of creativity, confidence, leadership, and self-expression. It's about allowing yourself to be seen not for the sake of attention, but because you have something worthwhile to contribute. So when astrologers talk about Jupiter moving into Leo, they're simply combining these 2 symbolic ideas. Growth meets self-expression, opportunity meets creativity, confidence becomes one of the themes of the year ahead. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody suddenly becomes confident overnight. In fact, growth often begins with discomfort. Sometimes the opportunity arrives before the confidence does. Interestingly, as Jupiter enters Leo, it immediately forms a challenging aspect with Chiron. Without getting too technical, you might think of this as confidence meeting self-doubt. You might find yourself thinking, I'd love to do that, but am I really good enough? If that sounds familiar, you're probably not doing astrology wrong. You might be actually describing the transit perfectly. Here's what I'd be watching for this month. Where are you being invited to step forward just a little more than you normally would? Maybe it's sharing an idea, maybe it's applying for something, and maybe it's finally calling yourself an astrologer instead of somebody who's interested in astrology. These small moments often tell you far more about a Jupiter transit than some dramatic life event. If Jupiter has a message this month, I think it's a simple one. Don't wait until you feel completely ready. Confidence rarely arrives first. More often than not, confidence grows because you took that first step. So if July presents you with an opportunity that feels just slightly bigger than your comfort zone, don't dismiss it too quickly. It might be exactly what Jupiter has been trying to show you. Throughout July, several of the slowest moving planets find themselves in a remarkably harmonious relationship with one another. Now, whenever I mention outer planets, some people immediately switch off because they think they're too slow to matter, and ironically, it's the opposite. These are the planets that tend to describe the bigger chapters of our lives rather than the day-to-day events. Pluto changes how power operates. Neptune changes ideals, dreams, and collective vision, and Uranus changes the way we innovate and think. And as we discussed, Jupiter expands whatever it touches. So when several of these planets begin working together, astrologers naturally pay attention because they're describing a much larger backdrop than a single month's forecast. This particular configuration has been discussed by mundane astrologers for decades. Long before 2026 arrived, astrologers have been identifying this period as one worth watching because of how unusual these planetary relationships are. Now, here's where I think people sometimes misunderstand these kind of alignments. Whenever astrology talks about collective change, people often expect fireworks. But collectively, change normally arrives through millions of individual decisions. For you personally, this might not feel dramatic at all. It might simply feel like you're becoming less interested in an old version of yourself. An old goal no longer excites you. A new direction quietly keeps getting your attention. You start saying yes to things you normally would have avoided a year ago. Here's what I'd be watching for. Notice what keeps your attention, not once, but repeatedly. The ideas that won't leave you alone. The conversation you keep coming back to. The opportunities that seem to arrive from different directions. Sometimes the biggest astrological shifts don't announce themselves with a bang. Sometimes they simply refuse to go away. One mistake I see people making is expecting outer planets to produce immediate results. These planets move slowly, so the themes they're introducing this July are likely to unfold over the next few years rather than the next few weeks. So if I could leave you with just these thoughts for July, it would be this. Slow down enough to hear what Mercury is trying to show you. Not every conversation needs an immediate response. Be willing to take one step outside your comfort zone. That's where Jupiter often does its best work. Confidence isn't something you wait for, it's something you build. And finally, keep your eyes open. There's a bigger story unfolding right now. You don't have to figure it all out this month, but you do want to notice where life keeps nudging you. Sometimes the most important changes don't arrive at the fanfare. They begin as a quiet feeling that you're already ready for something different. That's why I love astrology. Not because it tells us exactly what's going to happen, but because it helps us recognize the seasons we're living through, gives us context, reminds us that growth has a rhythm, and that every month offers us an opportunity to work with the sky instead of simply reacting to it. So head into July with your curiosity switched on. Pay attention to the conversations that matter. Say yes to the opportunities that stretch you, and trust yourself enough to notice where your life is naturally trying to grow. I'll see you next month.